It started with a sound no one in Kuwait was supposed to hear. Not tonight. Not like this. A low mechanical hum, almost invisible against the desert wind. And then, seconds later, everything changed. Explosions, multiple, precise, coordinated. And within minutes, one question began spreading faster than the smoke rising over the Gulf. Did Iran just strike U.S. allies directly? Because if that's true, this isn't just another regional incident. This is the moment everything shifts. At first, there was confusion. Local reports were chaotic. Some described unidentified aerial objects, others said drones. A few eyewitnesses claimed they saw flashes in the sky, small, fast moving lights, too controlled to be random, too deliberate to ignore. Then came the first confirmed detail. The targets weren't random, they were strategic, energy infrastructure, logistics hubs, and, most alarming of all, areas believed to be used in coordination with U.S. military operations in the region. Let that sink in, because if those reports are accurate, this wasn't a warning shot. This was a message, a calculated one. Now, here's where things get even more dangerous. Kuwait isn't just any country in the Middle East. It sits right at the edge of some of the most critical supply routes in the world. Oil flows through here. Military coordination happens here. And perhaps most importantly, it's considered one of the more stable U.S. aligned zones in a region already filled with tension. So why strike here? Why now? And why in this specific way? Because this wasn't a missile barrage. It wasn't loud, overwhelming, or designed for mass destruction. Instead, it was surgical, drones, low cost, hard to detect, easy to deny, and incredibly effective if used correctly, which raises a terrifying possibility. This may not have been about destruction, but demonstration, a proof of capability, a signal that says we can reach you anywhere, anytime. But here's the part that's keeping analysts awake right now. No one has officially claimed responsibility, not yet. And that silence, it's louder than the explosions. Because in modern warfare, especially in this region, what's not said often matters more than what is. Iran has used proxy groups before, militias, aligned factions, forces that operate in the shadows, giving plausible deniability while still delivering a clear message. So the question becomes, was this Iran directly or something even more complicated? Now, zoom out for a second, because this didn't happen in isolation. Over the past few weeks, tensions between Iran and the United States have been quietly building. Naval movements, warnings issued behind closed doors, unusual activity in the Gulf. Nothing dramatic enough to dominate headlines, but enough to signal that something was shifting beneath the surface. And now, suddenly, we have drone strikes hitting a U.S. ally, not in a war zone, not in a contested border, but in a place that was supposed to be relatively safe. Think about the timing, think about the method, and most importantly, think about the message. Because whoever planned this understood one thing perfectly. Fear travels faster than fire, and right now that fear is spreading. Within hours of the incident, emergency protocols were activated. Air defenses were put on high alert. Security around key installations tightened instantly. And behind the scenes, something else began happening. Something far more serious. Conversations between governments, between military commanders, between people who understand exactly how quickly something like this can spiral out of control. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. If this attack is confirmed to be linked to Iran, then this isn't just a regional incident anymore. It becomes a direct challenge, a test, and possibly the beginning of a chain reaction. But what makes this even more unsettling is what we don't know. How many drones were there really? Were all of them intercepted, or did some slip through undetected? And if they did, what else might already be in motion? There's another detail, small but critical, that's starting to emerge. Some sources suggest that these drones weren't launched from far away, meaning they may not have come directly from Iran at all, which opens up an entirely new layer of complexity. Because if these strikes were launched from within the region, then this isn't just about external threats anymore. It's about something closer, something embedded, something already inside the system. And that changes everything, because now the battlefield isn't just across borders, it's everywhere. So where does this go next? Does the United States respond? Does Kuwait escalate security into full lockdown? Or does this remain in the shadows, just another silent warning in a growing invisible war? Because one thing is clear, this wasn't random, this wasn't accidental, and this definitely wasn't the end of the story. In fact, What happened after the strikes may be even more dangerous than the strikes themselves, because new intelligence is starting to surface. And if it's true, this could be just the first move in something much bigger. But what that intelligence reveals changes the entire picture. And once you see it, you'll understand why this situation might be far closer to escalation than anyone is admitting. The first reports were unsettling, but the intelligence that followed, that's what turned this from an incident into a warning. Because within hours of the drone strikes, something unusual started happening behind the scenes. Military tracking systems, quietly monitoring the Gulf, picked up patterns, not random movements, not isolated signals, patterns. And those patterns pointed to something far more coordinated than anyone initially thought. Let's break this down. Shortly after the explosions in Kuwait, regional defense networks began reviewing radar data. At first, it looked like scattered drone activity, small signatures, low altitude, nothing out of the ordinary in a region where surveillance is constant. But then analysts noticed something strange. The drones weren't flying blind. They were navigating with precision, avoiding detection zones, adjusting altitude at critical moments, and most importantly, moving in synchronized paths. That doesn't happen by accident. That requires planning, coordination, and a level of intelligence that suggests someone was watching the defenses and learning. Now, here's where it gets even more serious. Some of those drone paths didn't originate from across the Gulf. They started closer, much closer, which raises a chilling possibility. These drones may have been launched from within or near Allied territory. Let that sink in. Because if true, it means whoever is behind this isn't just capable of striking from afar, they have access, positioning, and potentially support networks already in place. And this is exactly the kind of strategy that has defined Iran's regional approach for years. Not always direct confrontation, but layered influence, proxy groups, local partnerships, forces that can operate independently but align strategically when it matters most. Groups often linked directly or indirectly to organizations like Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And more specifically, its elite external operations unit, the Quds Force. This is the unit responsible for projecting Iran's influence beyond its borders, training, funding, coordinating, and when necessary, striking. But here's the key detail that's making analysts nervous. The level of sophistication in this attack suggests more than just proxy involvement. It suggests oversight, direction, possibly even real time coordination. And if that's the case, then this wasn't just a message from a local group. It was something much bigger. At the same time, communications traffic in the region spiked. Encrypted channels, unusual bursts of activity, messages moving quickly between locations that don't normally show this level of coordination. Now, we don't have the exact content of those communications, but the timing, that's what matters because they began just before the strikes and continued long after. So, what does that tell us? It tells us this operation wasn't just about hitting targets, it was about managing the aftermath, monitoring reactions, and possibly preparing for what comes next. And then came another development, one that didn't make major headlines, but absolutely should have. U.S. surveillance assets in the region began shifting position, quietly, strategically, no official announcements, no public statements. But satellite data and defense observers started noticing changes in deployment patterns, naval assets adjusting their positions in the Gulf, air patrols increasing in frequency, and reconnaissance activity intensifying across key zones. Now ask yourself, why would that happen unless there was concern about a follow up? Because that's what this looks like. Not a one off strike, but the opening move. And if you think that sounds extreme, consider this. In previous conflicts involving Iran and U.S. allies, initial strikes have often been followed by secondary actions, sometimes hours later, sometimes days, but always with a purpose to escalate pressure, to test responses, to push boundaries without triggering full scale war. Which brings us to a critical question. Was this attack designed to provoke a response or measure one? Because those are two very different strategies, and both are dangerous. If it's a provocation, then whoever is behind it may be expecting retaliation, waiting for it, prepared to escalate further. But if it's a measurement, then this is something even more calculated, a test of defenses, a way to gather data, to see how quickly systems respond, where the gaps are, how decisions are made under pressure. And that kind of information, it's invaluable, especially if you're planning something bigger. Now, here's where things take an even darker turn. Some intelligence sources are suggesting that not all drones used in the attack have been accounted for, meaning there could have been more. Some possibly diverted, some possibly still active. Think about that for a second. Unidentified aerial systems operating in a region on high alert with no clear origin, no confirmed control, and no guarantee they've all been neutralized. That's not just a security issue, that's a ticking clock. Meanwhile, inside United States defense circles, the tone has shifted. Publicly, statements remain cautious, measured, focused on investigation and coordination. But privately, there's growing concern that this incident could mark the beginning of a phase where attacks are less visible but more frequent, less destructive but more strategic. Because this isn't about overwhelming force, it's about control, psychological pressure, and the ability to strike without warning. And if that's the strategy, then what happened in Kuwait might not be the main event. It might be the setup, because there's one final detail that hasn't been fully explained yet. A detail buried in early reports, something most people overlooked. One of the targeted locations wasn't just strategic, it was symbolic. And if that choice was intentional, then the message behind this attack becomes even more dangerous because it suggests this isn't just about capability, it's about intent. And once you understand that intent, the next possible move becomes a lot clearer and a lot more terrifying. Now, the situation starts to shift from tension to something far more dangerous because once you understand the pattern behind the strikes, the question is no longer what just happened. It becomes what happens next. Let's go back to that overlooked detail. One of the targets hit during the drone strikes in Kuwait wasn't just strategic, it was symbolic. A location tied directly or indirectly to U.S. regional coordination, not a massive base, not a headline grabbing facility, but something quieter, more subtle, the kind of place that sends a message only insiders fully understand. And that message, it wasn't just we can hit you, it was we know exactly where to hit. That changes the entire equation because this isn't random escalation anymore. This is precision signaling, and precision signaling often comes before something bigger. Now, zoom out again. Across the Gulf, tension is building in layers. In Iran, military leadership has been unusually quiet publicly, but internally, movements suggest readiness. In United States, command structures' alert levels haven't officially changed, but operational posture has. And in between, a region filled with flashpoints. Let's talk about those flashpoints, because this is where things can spiral fast. The Gulf isn't just a body of water, it's a pressure zone. Every ship, every drone, every radar signal matters, especially near critical choke points like the Strait of Hormuz, a place where even a minor disruption can trigger global consequences. Oil markets, shipping routes, military positioning, everything connects here. Now imagine this scenario: a second wave of drone activity, larger this time, more coordinated, targeting not just infrastructure, but movement, tankers, naval escorts, support vessels, not to destroy them completely, but to disrupt, to create uncertainty. What happens then? Insurance rates spike overnight, shipping slows, global energy markets react instantly, and suddenly, what started as a regional incident becomes an economic shock. And here's the key: you don't need a full scale war to create global impact anymore. You just need precision disruption. Now, consider another possibility, one that analysts are taking very seriously. What if the Kuwait strikes weren't the main target, but a distraction? Think about it. While attention is focused on one location, something else could be moving into position elsewhere, quietly, unnoticed. There are already reports, unconfirmed but persistent, of increased activity among Iran aligned groups in neighboring regions. Movements that don't look defensive, they look preparatory. Groups historically linked to networks supported by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps have a pattern. They don't act all at once, they build pressure, multiple fronts, multiple signals. Each one small enough to avoid immediate escalation, but together they create a situation that's hard to control. Now imagine this: a drone strike in Kuwait, rocket activity somewhere else, naval tension in the Gulf, cyber disruptions targeting infrastructure, all happening within a tight time frame. Individually, each event might be manageable, but together they overwhelm decision making, they stretch response capabilities, and most importantly, they create confusion. And confusion is where mistakes happen, because in high pressure environments, decisions are made fast, sometimes too fast. A misinterpreted radar signal, a delayed communication, a defensive action mistaken for aggression. And suddenly the situation jumps from controlled tension to open confrontation. Now, here's where things get even more serious. Inside military planning circles, there's always a concept called threshold, the point at which response becomes unavoidable. The line you don't cross until suddenly you do. The question right now is, did the Kuwait strikes move us closer to that threshold, or did they quietly cross it? Because if they crossed it, then what comes next isn't optional, it's inevitable. And there are signs, subtle but real, that suggest we may already be approaching that line. Increased surveillance flights, faster reaction times, shorter decision windows, all indicators of a system preparing for rapid escalation. But here's the twist: not everyone wants escalation. In fact, most actors involved are trying to avoid full scale war, but they're also trying to maintain leverage, power, position, and that creates a dangerous balance because when everyone is pushing, but no one wants to go too far, eventually someone miscalculates. Now let's bring this back to the drones because they're not just tools, they're strategy, low cost, high impact, difficult to trace, easy to deploy, which means they're perfect for this kind of conflict, a conflict that lives in the gray zone, not quite peace, not quite war. And if this is the new battlefield, then what we saw in Kuwait might not be the exception. It might be the beginning of a new normal, frequent, targeted, unpredictable. So now the real question becomes, how does this end? Does it stay contained? Does it escalate slowly? Or does one moment, one decision push everything over the edge? Because behind all the strategy, all the signals, all the positioning, there's one factor no one can fully control: human reaction. And if that reaction comes at the wrong time, in the wrong place, with the wrong interpretation, then what started as a silent drone strike could turn into something far louder and far more irreversible. But there's one final scenario, rarely discussed publicly, that could change everything overnight. A scenario that doesn't just escalate the conflict, it transforms it. And if that scenario begins to unfold, there won't be any more warnings, only consequences. There's a scenario that military planners almost never discuss publicly, not because it's impossible, but because it's too real, too close, too dangerous to ignore. It begins quietly, just like Kuwait. No massive buildup, no official declaration, just another incident, another drone, another strike, another denial. But this time, the response is different. Let's say a follow up attack happens, not bigger, but bolder, closer to a known US linked site, more visible, harder to dismiss. And this time, the attribution isn't unclear. It's pointed, direct. Suddenly, the ambiguity disappears, and with it, so does the restraint. Inside United States command circles, there's a doctrine that guides moments like this: measured response, controlled escalation, show strength but avoid full scale war. But doctrines depend on time, clarity, and control. In a fast moving situation like this, those three things can vanish in seconds. Because here's the reality: if a second strike hits, and it's clearly linked back to Iran or its networks, the pressure to respond becomes overwhelming, not just politically, but strategically. And that response, it wouldn't look like a drone. It wouldn't be subtle. It would be visible, decisive, and designed to send a message that can't be ignored. Now imagine that response targets something tied to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a base, a facility, a command node. Even if it's limited, even if it's controlled, it changes the entire game. Because from that moment on, this isn't shadow conflict anymore. This is open confrontation. And here's the problem with open confrontation in this region: it doesn't stay contained. The Gulf lights up. Naval forces reposition instantly. Air defenses activate across multiple countries. Allies are pulled in, some willingly, some not. In places like Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, security levels jump overnight. Oil infrastructure becomes a priority target and a priority defense because everyone knows if energy flows are disrupted, the impact isn't regional, it's global. Now bring back the choke point we mentioned earlier, the Strait of Hormuz. Nearly a fifth of the world's oil passes through here. Even the threat of disruption sends shockwaves through markets. So what happens if tensions escalate here? Not a full blockade, not even a direct attack, just enough uncertainty to make ships hesitate. That's all it takes. Prices spike, markets react, governments step in, and suddenly What started as a drone strike in Kuwait becomes a global economic event. But the most dangerous part, it's not the economics, it's the momentum. Because once both sides begin responding, strike for strike, signal for signal, the space for de escalation shrinks fast. And then we reach that word again, threshold, the moment where actions stop being reversible, where decisions carry consequences that can't be walked back. Now, here's the final layer of this scenario, the one that keeps strategists up at night. What if neither side actually wants full scale war, but both are preparing for it anyway? That's the paradox. Preparation itself can trigger escalation. Movements are misread, intentions misunderstood, defensive actions seen as offensive. And in that environment, one wrong move is all it takes: a radar lock, a misfired interceptor, a drone mistaken for something bigger. And suddenly there's no more gray zone, no more deniability, no more limited incidents, just escalation. Now bring it back to where we started, the sound over Kuwait, the hum in the night, the explosions that didn't just hit targets, they triggered questions, questions that still don't have clear answers. Was this a warning, a test, or the first step in something already unfolding? Because if there's one thing history has shown, it's that conflicts like this don't always begin with massive events. They begin with moments like these, quiet, precise, easy to underestimate, until suddenly they're not. And right now, all the pieces are in motion. Signals are being sent, responses are being calculated, lines are being tested. The only thing we don't know yet is where those lines will finally break, because when they do, it won't just change the region, it could change everything.